Okay, let's look at this, one of our first word problems. In this problem it says, for his long-distance phone service, Alan pays an $8 monthly fee plus 6 cents per minute. Last month, Alan's long-distance bill was $16.64. For how many minutes was Alan billed? Okay, so I don't want you to get into the habit of just doing some random computations on paper in your head and coming up with the answer. So one of the student learning outcomes for this course is that you are able to, at the end of this course, you're able to use algebra to solve real-world problems. Real-world problem is a word problem. So using algebra means using variables and solving equations. Okay? So I want you to get into the habit of doing that on your homework, in your notebook, so that on the exam next week, you know what to do. You know how to demonstrate that you can use algebra to solve this problem. Even though it's kind of basic, and many of you probably can do some scratch work and get a number, and you know what the number means, you have to use algebra. That's the point of this course. So you won't get credit for it if you do not set up and solve an equation. Okay? So I'm going to show you how to do that, because the problems are going to get much, much more complicated than this one. And so if you have the basics down on some of these basic problems, you won't get confused on the more complicated ones. So before you can write down an equation, you have to decide what variable you're going to use, or variables, sometimes you need more than one, and what they're going to represent. And then you have to tell the reader what they represent. So your variables are always going to represent the things that are not known, and almost always it's going to be the things that the question is asking you to find. So in this question, we're asked to find the number of minutes that he was billed for. So I'm going to use X, and I'm stating to my reader that X is going to equal the number of minutes that he talked. Okay? You could say the number of minutes that he was billed for. And you could say, let X represent the number of minutes that he was billed for. You don't have to say X equals. However, you should not say, let X equal minutes, because X is not a minute. X is a number of minutes, okay? So be very, very clear. Demonstrate to your reader that you know exactly what your variable represents. Okay, so now we're going to write down an equation. We're going to use last month's long-distance bill. We know the total for the bill was $16.64, but what was it comprised of? It wasn't just, he wasn't just billed for the calls. He had calls plus a monthly fee. So his monthly bill every month is comprised of the cost of the calls that he made plus the monthly fee. So the monthly fee is the same every month, but the cost of the calls depends on the number of minutes that he talked, right? So last month he talked for X minutes. And how much did those X minutes cost? Well, he's being charged 6 cents for each of those minutes. So we have to multiply X minutes times 6 cents for every 1 minute. And notice I wrote it as a fraction. You don't have to do that. You could say 6 cents per minute. But the way I wrote it is very helpful in many word problems, because when you're setting up a problem with a lot of unknowns, you want to write things as fractions so that you can see how the units cancel. And especially if you're going to take a chemistry class, this is extremely important. This is how I passed chemistry. It's called unit analysis or dimensional analysis. Notice that X minutes is really X minutes over 1. We could write that as a fraction, right? So minutes is in the numerator, And since we're multiplying by another fraction that has minutes in the denominator, those minutes would cancel, and all we'd be left with is dollars or cents, dollars, which is good because we're talking about a bill, and we want dollars to be there, to be the only thing left. We don't want minutes to be there. So setting it up like this is helpful visually to see that the units are going to cancel correctly. Okay, so that's the total cost of his calls, X minutes times 6 cents per minute. And then we have to add to that the $8 monthly fee. And all of that last month totaled $16.64. Okay, so there's our equation. Now let's rewrite it without all the dollar signs and minutes. So let's rewrite it without units. So it's 0.06x plus 8 equals 16.64. And now we solve this for x. So we want to get x all by itself. Let's isolate x. First, let's subtract 8 from both sides. So remember, whatever you do to one side, you have to also do to the other. So I'm now left with 0.06x on the left and 8.64 on the right. And now I want to get rid of the 0.06. Since that's multiplication, that means I want to divide, but don't forget to do it on both sides. So now on the left, I'm left with just an x, and on the right, in my calculator, I get 144. But that's not quite the answer. Remember, it's a word problem and we have units. So your answer should be in minutes. So it's 144 minutes. So don't forget that. So as you go forward, all your word problems, the first step is to define your variable or your variables, write down the equation, solve the equation, and then circle your answer and include the units. You will lose points if you don't have units in your answer, in your word problems, okay? And you will lose points if you don't define your variables before you write down your equation. And also, in those complicated word problems that we're going to see later, well, starting next week, it's really going to help you set up your equation if you know really clearly and understand what your variables represent. Okay, so that's my first video on word problems, and I'll give you many, many more. Stay tuned.